noticed the one slide in there we talked about starting a revolution. And one of the things we want you to think about is this is a revolution that will make some people feel uncomfortable. It's going to take some people in the room outside your comfort zone. But as we've done our research and we've looked at everything, it's the next thing we as an HR industry need to do. Again, as kind of a recap, everybody knows the numbers in terms of the recession. With the 7 million people that were laid off. The interesting thing also is that only 1 million of that 7 was from the Fortune 500. So the most of the reduction in workforce came from small and medium-sized businesses. It was mentioned in some of the other presentations too that one of the problems we have as an HR professionals now is that we've lost our credibility. We've lost employee loyalty because the reductions that took place were not just reductions, but they were public. They were drastic. So as a result, the workforce out there doesn't trust corporations. The need for companies and employees to be able to look at other alternatives, like being a contingent worker, being the type of workers that Libby was talking about. You've all felt the pain. How many of your budgets have been slashed? But yet, has your workload gone down? Not that much. You're being expected to do a lot more with what you have. The other problem, too, is that with most HR executives, they still don't have a place in the boardroom. And one thing we want to try to present you with this concept of human capital supply chain is that we feel this is a way for HR to become more and more strategic to the corporation. One thing we've learned is we've gone through all this is that why did it happen? Why did the reductions that took place have to be so public, so dramatic from where we were? And it's one thing to talk about, well, it was the economy. We had nothing to do with it. I think there is a part of it that we can make better. Because no matter how we look at this, there will be new cycles. There will be the next recession. There'll always be this cycle of improvement and boom and then bust. So what we have to do now as a HR profession is to think about, okay, what did we learn from this last cycle we're going through? So that when the cycle comes around again, hopefully not as drastically, we can be better prepared to make those reductions less drastic. One of the problems that CEOs had as things were coming up, the economy was changing, is they didn't have a real-time way of connecting what was going on with the business to their decreased need in human capital. One of the other things is that companies didn't have a way to gradually ramp down their workforce. So as a result, this disconnect was there. So what happened then is you had to have the drastic reductions. There was also a lack of strategic thinking in terms of the scientific approach to HR. And I know when I've talked with HR professionals about being more scientific in their job, or if I even mention the word Six Sigma, you can just see them kind of just tighten up in their chair. It just scares them to think, oh my God, I have to be more scientific in what I do. You know, they'll say, look, I didn't go to college to do that. I'm a people person. I'm a warm, fuzzy kind of person. I don't want to have to do that math stuff. But we have to learn it. Because that's how we're going to be able to transform HR. And the other thing we found very typically is that there's a lack of integrated systems, not within the HR community, but there was no connection between what was going on in the financial side of your businesses and what was going on in the HR. So as your CFOs were out in the market giving reduced guidance, saying, look, things are getting worse, here's our new guidance, that guidance wasn't necessarily automatically flowing into your HR systems. So, how do we prevent this? How do we prevent having to go through these massive public reductions again? As we've looked at it, we feel that we have to take a different approach. We have to look at things from a supply chain point of view. We have to take the things and the knowledge that already exists in many of your corporations and start to apply that to the human capital side. I was talking with Mike Grinnell, who's the VP of Staffing and Recruiting for Walmart. And we were talking about this concept. And he had one of these V8 moments. And he said, Tim, Walmart, we've got the world's best supply chain experts in the world. He said, I never thought to put them in the room with my recruiters and put them in the same room with my HR professionals, and for us to develop an HR process that uses those supply chain concepts. Again, it takes you away from your comfort zone, but in order to get ready for the next recession, we have to think about those things. Because it's not just the next recession, but it's how do we regrow our businesses. And that's what human capital supply chains are about right now. Is how do we regrow our businesses differently than we had in the past. So what we want to do is start to use the tools that are out there. And I mentioned the comment here about Think Six Sigma. When you look at supply chain literature that's been going on since the 80s, when Debbie started talking about Japanese world-class manufacturing techniques and everything, the knowledge is there. We in this room have to take that knowledge and apply it to our business. And Six Sigma is one of those ways of being able to do that. We have to take best practices that you can find within your own organization and take those supply chain best practices and apply that to your human resource processes, your talent management processes. And like I said, the knowledge is out there in the marketplace, and the talent, in many cases, is already in your organization. You have to find out who it is, you have to tap into it, and then start to apply it on the talent side. And then the other thing we have to do is we have to think about the systems that go around that. Now, if you think back in time, if you think about in the 1970s, that's when the first time when companies basically automated their financial systems. It was in the 70s. You move to the 1980s, manufacturing. It was their turn. And ERP systems were developed to tie manufacturing all together. Because in the early 80s, they were all separate systems. You had a separate purchasing system, separate manufacturing system, separate quality system. They were all separate. And only under the concept of ERP systems did they all come together. In many cases, those ERP systems were available from a single vendor that had all that tied together. You move to the 1990s, and it was all about CRM systems for sales and marketing. And then you go to the decade of the 2000s, and it was about the internet and getting all that content on the internet. So when you look back in time, the financial people had their time, the manufacturing distribution people had their time, sales and marketing had theirs, and the IT people had theirs with the internet. It's HR's time now. And this is the message you have to take back to your CEOs. And it's not just a budget discussion. It's about saying, how do we change the fundamental way we run our businesses in terms of HR and talent management. So again, and I'll pick some other points here in a minute. Now, when we talk about human capital supply chains, we're talking about this flow of people. And Libby hit on it earlier too, saying, you know, it's a whole different type of workforce out there now. They don't intend to stay. You have to accept the fact they're going to be coming in and going out. And in some cases, they're going to come in and they're going to leave. A couple years later, they're going to come back and they're going to leave again. And maybe later on in their career, they come back and they leave again. We're not used to that. We're not used to a continual flow of talent through the organization. We think finitely. We think, you know, once we get them in the door and they're hired and they're with their organization, then we kind of move on. Because we've got all these other recs we've got to fill. But again, we have to think about it. It's a flow. It's a supply chain. So what we have to do is think about all those different pieces of the supply chain, from the temporary worker through their staffing supplier, and in many cases now, procurement's part of the equation now too. It's not just an HR function. And part of that is because we kind of let procurement get in the middle of it. You know? Procurement, their benefit is that they're very system-oriented. They're very methodical in how they go through things. So what's happened now is contingent that procurement office is kind of in the middle of things now. So we have to learn to get along with them. We may not like them because we think, you know, they're left brain, we're right brain, we're just different personalities. But in order for your corporation to get ready and to move forward and to rebuild your business, you have to get in tight with that procurement office Now, HR, we're great at the onboarding process and making sure everybody's feeling comfortable, and then moving on to the hiring manager. Again, when you come back and make the analogy back to manufacturing, the supply chain model holds up. Because in manufacturing, you had your part supplier, your sub-assemblies, procurement was procuring all those different sub-assemblies and materials, manufacturing assembled, and then you have quality.